We sound. Hello.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another live stream that we are doing. Today, I have the honor to host Aviram Hassan from Metal Beer, our friend, Mirodi, one of the developers, and Ivan from Daytona. But before we are starting, a couple of announcements. So first, I want to thank Spellmeet for sponsoring this live stream every week. I'm Gabriel. I'm leading the developer relations at Permit, and I want to say that if you have any kind of comments, question, no matter what platform you're watching us, even at YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you are, just comment on the post, and we can see it here. And we are trying to answer that live. So any question that you have, just throw it up, and we'll try to discuss it or answer to you. And also, the recording of this live stream will be available on YouTube after that. So if you need to drop off, don't feel bad about it. You'll have the time to watch it later. And that said, let's start our live stream. So welcome, Ivan and Aviram, and I'll be happy if you can introduce yourself. And I'll start with Ivan.
Hey everyone, great to be here. My name is Ivan Burazin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Daytona. Daytona is a dev environment management platform. There's an open source version, enterprise version, helping people, not get stuck on their dev environments, basically. So yeah, I'll keep it short because I guess we'll talk about it more in the stream.
And Aviram?
Hi, everybody. I'm Aviram Hassan. I'm Metabel CEO and co-founder. At Metabel, we build MUD, the open source project, which is the core project under MUD for Teams, which basically lets developers iterate against a remote shared environment, which is the counterpart of Ivan. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm happy that you said that the counterpart, because I really want to hear more about Mirror-D and Daytona. And since you started with the counterpart, so Abraham, what you can tell us about Mirror-D?
So basically, MUD was born out of struggle or pain me and my co-founder Eyal had, and that was that we couldn't have any way to test against a real environment, and basically the best environment to test in was staging, which was a huge environment with all the data that we'd like to test against. And to get to staging, we had to go through CI/CD, and CI/CD, as good as it gets, is like 5 minutes to 30 minutes, I would say. And that's, of course, feedback time that we lose. And then, like, you do context switch, you get coffee, and then you get hyper caffeinated, and then you go to anonymous addiction to coffee. So, like, a lot of impact and overall impact on how you perform. And basically, the idea with MUD is we enable you to just run your service locally in the context of the remote environment. And MUD for Teams is a control plane that enables you to share that environment, and basically a control plane for using MUD in an enterprise setting.
Yeah, I think this context switch and focus is something that's going to get over and over in this live stream, because I think developer that understand really well how to keep themselves from context switching and keep focus being a productive developer. I have some curiosity questions about Mirror-D. So when you describe remote environment state, is that the data that in remote environment, the state of the, what does that mean by remote state?
So basically, you can think of it as like deploying without going through the deployment step. So basically, the process is run locally, and it can access everything that exists on the remote environment. And there's a caveat to mention: the remote environment is a Kubernetes environment. So you target a deployment, a pod, any workload that is considered a workload in Kubernetes, and basically you can act as if you're running in the remote, as if you deployed. So basically all the data, state, queues, yeah. And you can, of course, debug and put breakpoints and everything from your local ID.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
And you can also use it in Daytona or any other dev containers, like any technology that allows you to spin up a machine, even if it's local or remote. You can still use MUD because, yeah, that's a bit of the difference that you probably will not just about. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we'll get to the context switch later. And Ivan, tell me about Daytona.
Sure. I think it makes sense to like give a bit of history, like why we got here. So why we got here is like it's a pretty long story, and it sounded like 2009. So the co-founding of Team of Daytona also co-founded a company called Code Anywhere back in 2009. So this was basically, I believe, I always say this, I believe, although the data seems to be correct, the very first browser-based IDE. I mean, it started as basically a notepad with an FTP connector, like way back when, right? And it sort of evolved with time. We were creating, as we got to Web 2.0, we did this on a full, syntax highlighting IDE. We created like multiple versions of our own IDEs, which is a very, very hard task. So kudos to Microsoft for making VS Code what it is today.
Right.
But that was the only way that we can offer this sort of solution back then. And as part of it, to be able to work with remote dev environments, so to use that IDE, you actually had to have dev environments somewhere in the browser or in the cloud working. And so we had to make this whole infrastructure underneath. And so Code Anywhere got a bit of success to it, but it was never sort of like super high growth, venture-backed company or whatnot. And so at some point we sort of like paused on that. I went to do other things. We were talking before, like the Shift conference, which happened a few days ago in Croatia. So I ran that got acquired and whatnot. But about 2 years ago, through like the channels of Code Anywhere, because we still left it up and running, basically, we got a bunch of inbound from like very, very large enterprise companies that they wanted something similar. What ended up being, they wanted that infrastructure tool that automates everything that they could run on their own system, because they all have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 engineers that are either just wasting a bunch of time setting up these dev environments, or it's for security purposes because, it has to be centrally behind the firewall, whatever it may be. And so that inbound was basically the sort of trigger for us to say, oh, the world has come to a place where they actually now respect these things, and the technology has advanced that we can actually do something like this. So the developer can use their local IDE, VS Code, IntelliJ, whatever, but we can run all this infra centrally and automate everything around the dev environment. So that's sort of what Daytona is, I guess, and happy to chat more.
Yeah, I think that's interesting perspective, because mostly like when I start coding, the main perspective of IDE was how they handle the language features, how they expose you the library functions, how do they keep you from errors before you are compiling the code. But you say the IDE today is much more than that. It's a large chain of infrastructure that we need to provide.
Actually, so what we might touch on this a bit later, and feel free to cut me off. We can do that. So what I believe is the way we had IDEs historically. What is an IDE? It's an integrated development environment, right? So it's like the idea was like you had Eclipse or IntelliJ or Visual Studio, like the original one, and that was like this big piece of software, which was actually an IDE. For the most part, you had all the dependencies, everything was embedded, everything was working there, and you use that when you ran the code. It basically ran if you wrote it properly. Today, we mostly use text editors, like the vast majority. Like their VS Code is a text editor. It's a very text editor on steroids, but it's still a text editor. And because of the way we've sort of architected the world, and we use microservices a lot, and all these things are no longer embedded in the IDE. The amount of work that the dev has to do to set up the dev environment is now drastically larger. And so Daytona is not an IDE. It's basically an infrastructure tool. And so what we want to do is sort of give developers that feel that they had way back in the day, where everything was sort of automated. But in this new world, it's very hard to automate it. And so we automate all that and letting you use the IDE and or text editor that you actually want to use.
Understood. And Aviram, I know you also, like Rimokal, is very strong in the Kubernetes and a cloud native side. Do you think it's like could be live in other ecosystems or type of or Kubernetes and cloud native? That's the main trigger for the need in products like Murdy and stuff.
Yeah. So basically, the need is embedded in the growth of microservices in decentralized architecture, where now, and it's also where the scale of organizations come through, because the architecture of your application is usually the architecture of your organization, and that's the idea, because every unit is can work on its own and interoperate, and you don't want each unit to be blocked on the another, especially if they're going through changes. Example, adding a new API, deprecating in an API. So companies like, I think most people can agree that microservices are now the dominant technology. Like there are some people, of course, have like a contrarian approach, and I think that monolith is good for when you can do monolith, and like it's everything is like in terms of what you need and when. But the reason we focus on Kubernetes is just that it's a major shareholder, like it holds most of the market of microservices. Like if you use microservices, almost most companies that can be our customer would be Kubernetes. Like we sometimes have people asking whether we support Cloud Run or any other more let's say serverless or like less infra way of running stuff. And theoretically we can support it. It's just that the use case becomes less like not the use case but the experience becomes less opinionated, because Mirror is very opinionated on how you should do stuff, and once you like, and also the architecture. So by focusing on Kubernetes, we can deliver the best experience there, and it also works in terms of market. So
Yeah, I think that that's interesting point, because when you're doing developer tools today, you can have the approach of I'm going with a ecosystem that is very fit for my use case, or do I trying to go with the wide meaning for developer tools, and then start from trying to attack everything and solve everyone's problem. But I think about you, Aviram, there is another interesting decision you took. You actually developed Melody in Rust, and Rust is a hot topic. It is a language that helps developer productivity.
so it might sound a bit cliche, but I think like one of the things that I do see in Rust is what you'd call user empathy, developer empathy. Like when you get an error, you don't want, if you know how Go errors look like, it's like two words, maybe some number, and like you can't really know what's going on, and like the compilation error, and usually the errors and everything is very like I just got it, like you duct tape something, and here is the error you got. And in Rust, every error you get is like super detailed, and you get this is the error, you might want to do that, and everything is like very on. Let's help people understand what's going on, because they're facing a very awkward situation where stuff doesn't work as they expect. And all the flows of MirD is built in a way that we are always thinking about how can we help the user troubleshoot what they're having and lead them to ways to solve the issue. So I think that by recruiting from the Rust community and people who come from the language and the community, they understand the value of having useful errors, and actually investing a lot in having this kind of focus, which you don't see in many other languages. Like the most friendly ecosystem on Java is probably Ruby on Rails. I haven't used it as a professional developer, but it's well known for being very compassionate towards the developer. And like on the other spectrum, I would put like C or Go, which is like very, yeah, let's get it working. And like if it doesn't work, yeah, you need to figure out and maybe search Google, and that's I think that affects the product and affects in a good way. But of course, Rust, it wasn't the reason we chose Rust. I can expand on that, but I think that might be a bit too annoying.
So, I mean, I really want to focus on the developer productivity perspective. And I want to ask you, Ivan, do you think that the languages and the framework that we choose affect the way that our developers getting productive?
I mean, I'm pretty sure. I mean, like you mentioned Rust and Go recently, like we do almost everything in Go. I mean, it's simple, easy to use, and it's very strong in the ecosystem where we are. So in the DevOps space, Kubernetes and Docker and whatnot. So we chose that, and almost everything that is inside of Daytona is built in that. Obviously, outside of the GUI parts, which is just basically React. So that's why we chose that. And when we're deciding, it was also, is there a strong community? Because there is an open source portion to Daytona, is like there be a community to help support that as well. And so Rust is super hot, absolutely. But when we were deciding this, there was because it is prevalent in the space that we're working on, and it's fairly easy for people to pick it up and onboard them, we decided to go that way as well. So there's multiple reasons why we did decide to do that.
Yeah, just to be like, before we jump to the next question, I don't have any problem with Go, and I think there are a lot of good use cases for using Go, and I think that's a good language. But it's just, I think good developer needs to see what they want to achieve, then choose a language. And as Ivan
Absolutely.
mentioned, yes, the
Absolutely agree.
reasons. But yeah, and of course, every language has its downside or upside, and Rust does have a lot of downside. But I do love it. Like I'm affectionate to it because I'm a developer. But yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, so Ivan mentioned Go, and I remember the first time I saw Go, I said, I mean, I was in a phase in my career that I said, okay, that's a language that a really senior developer created, because it looks like a language that the people who created that think, what is the problems that we have in any language, and try to solve them all. And that was lean, and that was easy to start, and that tried to put like the right patterns and stuff. And then I joined a developer organization. It was 2019. I joined a developer organization that started use Go in 2015. They actually contributed stuff for the initial version of Go, and that was like a hell of code. I mean, no one understand what's going on. It was like a huge monolith with 10,000s of lines of code. And I think at the end, it's the way that people are actually using that, that actually contribute to the way that developers being productive. And I think that a good opportunity to ask you from your experience. You both describe your way to found a startup that is doing developer productivity. What is your definition for developer productivity? And I'll start with you, Ivan.
I mean, there's so many things that we can describe as productivity. And so you can sort of like, is it people measure happiness, speed, time to commit, time to deploy? Like there's so many things that can be there. And depending on what type of company you are and how you measure them and what size you are as well. Like if you're a super small startup, like I think both of us are fairly small here, or the three of us actually are still fairly small. So like, I don't assume that any of us have like large reporting or any of these analysis companies inside looking at how long this takes. So I definitely define that as, and that's basically one of my philosophies in life. And like, how many barriers can I remove so that I can move forward faster? And I sort of define it through that prism. And so when you look at all the things that a developer does, what are the things that are slowing down? Where are the bottlenecks? And what can I do to remove that? Now, is that a product? Like, is that, Metal Bear, or is that Daytona, or is that nothing, none of those things? Or it's just like the specs suck, which could be as well. And so like, what can we do to sort of remove, again, those bottlenecks and make everyone happier, faster, and get to where we want to be?
Yeah, that's a good definition. Happier, faster. And Aviram, what is your definition?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Ivan, and I think the main thing is one of the very important, I would say, objective is happiness. Because, like you say, yeah, happiness, you're hippie, but no, it's like if like also in life, if you're happy, you're probably more effective than if you're not, and if you're depressed or so. And when you go to your job and you start doing stuff you don't like, and you have also a lot of barriers, as Ivan mentioned, that make you focus on something that does not work. For example, you need to fill up forms for bureaucracy, and you need to go and do a lot of people and ask them, can I do that? And you don't have an agency. And of course, what you want developers is to develop. And you want to get barriers, you want to give them way of paving the way fast and iterating. And any barrier that doesn't have any intrinsic value, for example, fill in a form because you need to fill a form, rather than you want to do something, and then that's the solution, and then you of course can optimize it. So
yeah, I think happiness, also want to add on that. Like people think, oh, we have to be like giddy and have like candy bars, whatever it might be. I don't know, I'm making things up, but like it's just not to do the things that make it hard to work at. I always give this example. It's something that we sort of solve, but it's a very plastic example, is that at very secure enterprises, the data has to be on a centralized server. And the way to do that historically was virtual desktop interfaces. For those who don't know, it's basically like a screen share into a server somewhere. And inside of that, you have your sorry?
It's live oral.
Yeah. And so you essentially have your ID there, and like you have a lag for sure. And it can be bad and it can be terrible. And so as a developer, I've asked this question a million times, and who's ever used this, I ask them, do you like doing that? And of course not. It's like the worst experience in the world. Probably not worst, but like very, very bad. And so just removing that experience and letting them work as they would work normally makes them way happier, because it's like, oh, don't have any things stopping me in my position, similar to like bureaucracy, but it's just like, what are those things that we can remove so that the developer is essentially more content with what they're doing?
That's interesting. So happiness faster and remove barrier. I want to connect that to some metrics, and I know velocity is something that many developer organization want to improve, and that's making me interested because we are doing authorization. We are doing in permit like permissions for user and authorization, and we have a sibling in the access control space, which is authentication. And for developers, authentication is like a solved problem. You just use one of these hundreds of authentication provider, and then you have authentication, you use that. And authorization is considered unsolved, and for us is good because we can sell. And if I'm comparing it to the developer productivity and velocity improvement, I think that 5 years ago, 7 years ago, most of the startups in this space were focused mostly in the CI/CD and the pipeline and the deployment, delivery, etc. Do you think we can say that CI/CD is a solved problem, and now the unsolved problem is the environment itself?
I mean, I can say the unsolved problems of the environment for sure. It's been something I've been doing on for 15 years. So I'm not going to say CI/CD is unsolved, although it seems fairly,
No.
standardized across. But the dev
Mhm.
environment, I feel, is just a mess. I'm sure that we all talk to these companies, and everyone is doing it in a different manner. Everything's in different ways. Everyone has different problems. Everyone has different solutions. Some home baked, some no solution, and people are trying to figure this out. And so I say this quite a bit, and I don't know if the two of you have driven in a Waymo, like the robo taxi things.
Not yet.
I know yet.
Yeah, so I mean, you've seen it basically. You hit a button
Yeah.
on your phone, and like a car comes and it drives you. And so for me, it's like beyond recognition, like I comprehension that we have self-driving cars in the world, and that dev environments are a problem. Like, how can we not solve this? Like, how is that not solved, right? So I strongly believe, and it's the basis of two of the companies that I built, that there's a lot of things to do, and both of us here are solving different angles to that problem. And yeah, I think we have a long way to go on that still.
Yeah. Aviram, what do you think? Do you think it's a phase that actually that's the main problem we need to solve in the developer productivity perspective?
So I think there are two, like I think in terms of timing and trend, it's a bit of different angle, Daytona versus Community, because it's not the same motion that drives to one another. I would say that CI/CD isn't solved. I hate CI/CD still, and it's one of the key reasons that Community is useful, is to remove the barrier of CI/CD, which is extremely important. But not when you want to develop and test something very fast. You shouldn't be Git pushing to test. And that's like somehow Mudi is competing with the CI/CD to some extent. And I think it's always there's a lot of big technological changes. The main thing that makes Mudi more required today is that more companies transformed into using Kubernetes, and now they're already they focus on just migrating into Kubernetes, and that was the big problem because they needed to move production and then the other environments. And then when they got back and okay, wait, we need to keep developing to this thing, and they're like, okay, how we do that? Like previously, we just ran everything locally, but like, what am I doing now? And then that's why they need release. So it's not like CI/CD and media are very. It's not a direct relationship, but it does have some relationship, of course.
Sorry, I was muted. I think that if I'm kind of trying to rephrase your answer, you said CI/CD is maybe solved for the velocity. It's indeed increased the velocity, and we can ship faster, we can deliver faster. But for developers, both problems.
I don't think so. Because it makes you ship better, I would say, because there's the guy Levels on Twitter that FTPs and like
Yeah. He went all the way back. He actually, what's interesting, he brought PHP back to be cool. Like people are talking about PHP on Twitter now. So yeah.
But maybe sponsored by Meta or something, but or Laravel. But basically, this guy is just like committing code and like not committing even, like just going through. FTP and uploading his PHP file. So yeah.
It's also funny that Laravel announced their new like $50 million round like a couple of days after that. I'm like, did that just happen? Like, what is that the magic? Also, fun fact: Code Anywhere was originally called PHP Anywhere, and it just had an FTP connector, and people who worked in PHP. That is where we came from, and we've gone full circle, I think, now with Levels. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah,
it's
so-
the
so-
glory days of PHP now. Right?
So like my stance is that people move to Kubernetes not to have a faster deployment or speed. It's just like having a better process, or more like on terms of how to do more sophisticated stuff, do more in a standardized way. But like, spinning up a VM and like just running a LAMP stack is very easy and very fast than spinning up a Kubernetes cluster.
Very nice.
Kubernetes. Yeah. So, so it's not about just speed. It's just like what you want to achieve, and like enterprises shows they want Kubernetes because that's a way for them to standardize a lot of disaster recovery, scale, operations. But yeah.
And security probably too. I
Yeah.
think that that's one of the main difference. I mean, it created a lot of new like Kubernetes like new security problems, but it's still something. I think one question that I really want to bring up is, so assuming we have some engineering leaders that watch us and want to give developer productivity, want to get some practices for developer productivity, I think I want to split it into two, because there are the tactic decisions of like team leaders who really want every day create a new motion for productivity, and there is like the director level or the second line level that want to get strategic decision. I think I'll start with you, Aviram, on the tactic decision. What is the practice? What is your practices for better tactics for developer productivity?
I think like if you're hands-on, then that's the best. Or like if you're not hands-on, being able to try to do some of the tasks your engineers do, and then like you see what they do in the trenches. Like sometimes you get disconnected. You're saying, well, like sometimes we get people saying, yeah, I don't understand how build is valuable, and then they didn't code for like 2 years, right? So they're like, oh, we don't understand like why you need it. Well, you just like you can do port forward, you can write a script, like you can do like tons of stuff, and then only then you get to code, and then it breaks, and you need to maintain this weird stack that you've built yourself. And basically, I think just by doing, I would say what I see as a good manager, you would see what are the bottlenecks and what is annoying you, and that's something you can prioritize and say, okay, so I did this task and I spent like 20 minutes on this thing, on setting up a standardized environment, for example, then you should go for Daytona. Or you wanted to work on a real environment with real data from staging, and then okay, go for Meridio. For example, any other issue like the CI/CD is slow. Okay, let's invest in that, because just to deploy took me 5 days because the CI/CD pipeline is like very long. So just get out of the eye chair and like start seeing what's happening. And of course, you can also do it in pair programming, like talk to the engineers and see. But it's harder to perceive, because usually they'll just like say, yeah, it's okay, we can live with that, because not all engineers have the like see how like when you suffer as an individual, it feels from your perspective as something that everybody lives with it, right? And then somebody else come from who is objective towards it, and they're like, no, that's you're mad, like you should do something about it, you can't live like that. And that's I think what enables also managers to be able to do that, because they come from a bit of the outside and see how others are working, and then able to by doing the practice understand what is wrong, what can be improved.
I mean, I agree with Aviram completely on this. Like, that is the best way. I mean, managers can do, surveys or data analysis and all these things, but as soon as you like look at dashboards and metrics, whatever you decide to measure is what people optimize for, which is not always what you want to get to. You have a goal, you want, to ship faster, create this product, whatever it may be. But like if you optimize for one KPI, whatever it may be, number of PRs, velocity of acceptance, or whatever it may be, then people optimize for that, maybe even gain those things. So definitely the number one thing is like either do it yourself or be very close to the team and actually observe. If you're not doing, at least observing from a first, like secondhand over the shoulder type way. Not exactly, people might not like that, or remote, but in the sense of like, oh, I see this is where they're wasting time. This is a blocker, and can we, can you affect those things essentially? Like, I mean, if you can do it yourself as well, and you have the time to do that, that's absolutely the best way. Again, people at large scales, they like data, they like reports, they like all those things. But I also agree that that is, again, people optimize for those things. So if the closer you can get to it, the more sort of valuable information you can get and help developers move faster.
I would be trendy and say maybe you should be founder mode for a few minutes or a few hours a day.
Founder mode. Let's go founder mode. I'm totally in on founder mode. I love everything that happened about that, and I'm totally hyped about what has gone on Twitter because of that. The pros and cons and all the memes. I love it. So that is very true for this as well. Go founder mode. Go in. What's the problem? Dig into that. And I'll stop there and let anyone continue if you want on that, or we can digress.
No, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, my question is, do you really believe that if I'm now a director of an R&D team of 300 developers in like large corporate, do you think I really could be in a founder mode? Do you think like
yes,
trying to code?
I actually do.
Not always.
It depends on what. And again, like, so it depends on what is the biggest problem. So recently, I mean, people can think of what they want, and I'm not getting into the conversation of the person. So please, but recently read, Walter Isaacson's a piece on, Elon Musk, the whole book about him. And the book is whatever, and you can think about him, whatever. But one thing that you actually recognize, I just finished it before the founder mode essay came out. So it was like, oh, this is exactly what this person is doing, which is what is the biggest problem for the company moving forward now, and then get in the trenches of that problem, remove the roadblocks, let the company go. So it's not like you're going to be on all places all the time. I don't think that's possible at all. But as a company, what your number one, issue is, what is your next step? And if something's like stopping there, where is that stopping? And then get into the trenches with those people. I think that is what we're talking about more than, oh, I know what all 300 of my developers are doing all the time. That's probably not realistic at all, or the best use of your time.
Yeah, and just to be more pragmatic, I don't think that engineering as a company you mentioned should be founder mode 100%, or I wouldn't call it founder mode, but they need to touch grass, right? They go and create issues, and then they don't realize why is this issue taking so long. In my days, adding a new button and overlay took 5 minutes. Why is it taking so long? And then they see that they need to create an issue. The issue needs to be approved by the product, and the project needs to allocate time. The sprint needs to be to start, and there's a lot of stuff going on. And then you need someone who has enough power to say, okay, this can't work this way. We need to change the mechanics, because the mechanics were added for good reasons. But then it's like when you build spaghetti, right? You add something. I made it a little small if then sometimes you need to break it and do a bit of a refactor. Of course, the refactor is hard, but you need sometimes to cut some of the grass and start understanding what is better for organization in terms of mechanics. And you can't do it without actually doing it, or unless being very connected with people who do touch.
Absolutely. So to your point, and what you said is all this is all bureaucracy basically. So Jira tax issues, locating time, and whatever it may be. And so someone has to have the interest and the ability to go dig into that. And the second is that person actually has to have the, clout, be a founder, be a manager, to be able to say, you know what, this is bullshit. Remove these steps. Let's get it done. Right. So both those things are absolutely true. And I agree with you 100% on that.
And I'll push you. If I really want to look at numbers, because I'm really busy and I have another layer on top of me that I really need to get satisfied and get a budget for, getting Daytona Enterprise. What are the numbers that can really teach me about developer productivity and how to improve that?
So, we have a few numbers that we look at. And so what we look at, the value prop for Daytona, there's 3 value props. So one is productivity. So basically there's a bunch of studies, we've done our own, where developers spend anywhere from 49 to 73. We sort of average it out at 56% of their productive time being everything across a year. When you remove PTO, holidays, admin tasks, emails, all that stuff, the time that they're actually, working, as coding mostly, but working. Yeah. And then of that time, half of it is lost on dev environment, configs, waiting for builds and waiting for tests. That's it. That's all gone. And so that's a huge chunk. And so if you look at from a financial perspective, the average American developer has like 200K a year, whatever. And if you factor that in, like how much of money do you spend just on these tasks that make no sense? But even if you don't factor in that, it's like, what is the time to market now if you can shorten all that together, right? And so that's the productivity. We have a security aspect and probably not part of the talk here, but definitely when you look at that is a very, very big number. We also have like a calculator, like to the ROI of putting a Daytona like product, not saying Daytona is the only product. And the calculator is just silly. It is insane. Like I actually feel silly sending it because if you have like 500 engineers, it's like a $10 million, like, ROI. It's like, how is this even possible? Right. So, working on that, but definitely those are the numbers that we look at and we communicate to people that that are working or trying out Daytona.
That brings me up again to think about context switch and focusing. Do you think that also there is a part of education in developer productivity, not only the tools, but teaching people about types of focus, state of mind, type stuff like that?
Sure. I don't think people actually think about that, but that is absolutely true. I also don't know if there's tools. So we're talking about tools here. But if your question is generally, can you be in focus mode or in flow and like be concentrated heads down and work? Definitely. Can you have less meetings with people? Can you like have meetings only on Fridays or whatever it may be so they can be as focused as possible? I'm pretty sure that's true. Also, what's interesting for developers specifically, I find that the way developers can work in an input output ecosystem. So basically you have an issue or a Jira ticket or whatever it may be. And if it's specced out really well, you, for the most part, don't have to talk to anybody, just like can continue working. And I found that very specific to software engineering. And that is not true for most other creative jobs, I think. So I'd love to hear other opinions, but I found that when I've worked in other companies or my own, like developers have a very specific way of work, which is quite different from other creatives.
What do you think, Aviram? I am asking because Ivan said he want to hear more.
Yeah, I'm absolutely.
I didn't talk about the ROI, so maybe I get back to it later. But in terms of education, I think that like one of the basic traits I expect of an engineer is to be able to do research and like try to like break some of the stuff and see like how stuff is built and how they should improve it. So like I'm not sure like there is like value maybe in like having some way of like as the corporate to provide education like courses and etc. But basically, I expect any developer to be able to like Google and like how do I do this better? And like and I don't think that developers would like to be educated. What we see usually, and that's a bit of annoying. Developers are like for most part, they're very like, and it goes with what Ivan said, they're very conservative. Like they have their way of working, and if it works, they won't break it, right? They're saying, oh, I do this, and I want to use a new tool because I like how it works, and it works for me. And sometimes they need to see how someone else is doing it, like screen over or like over a screenshot, they're starting to use something else, and they're like, wait, what are you doing right now? And they're like, hey, I'm using this cool thing, and they're like, why am I not using it? And they probably read about it, they thought about using it, and they said no. But then when they see a demo, that like what's making them try it. And if they try it and it doesn't work, they really hate you. So it's like
Exactly,
you have one shot, and if it doesn't work, then it's like you failed to educate them. So I would say the developers are very scared. and
I want to just add on that, and I think the biggest barrier for them to try a new product, be it Metal Bear, Daytona, whatever it may be, especially in DevTools, is just that whole cognitive load of like, oh, now I have to like try this out, no matter how simple it is. And I think I was talking to your co-founder, a couple of months ago, like onboarding is like a snap. And for Daytona, same, like for developers, like one button, or in CLI, it's one command. There's no learning curve, like absolutely. But just the idea of trying something else is such a cognitive load on people that they won't even try it unless they've seen it like 27,000 times somewhere, or their like, best friend or colleague is like, yo, look at this. This is awesome. And then to your point, it's like, oh, why? What? Maybe I can do this as well. But yeah, I think that is one of the largest barriers to onboard, or at least in the sense of test out a new product in for engineers.
And I have to say it does make sense in terms of like you have something that works, and like you can invest and research and take the risk of doing that and then having it not work, and then you still have to do all the work, and like you need to bet that the investment in moving to the new way would be good enough to cover for the cost of exploring it even. And that's like a very game theory decision that I would say yields towards not trying it out.
No,
And
for
it doesn't.
sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of ROI, like I like one thing I like seeing. Like I think that metrics are good if you have them, but it's kind of hard to measure developer productivity. One thing we saw that it keeps going, being very apparent, is that like doing what you'd call study in motion, time in motion study. So where you show how you do it in the previous way, like without nudity, without Daytona, and how you do it afterwards. And like that's very like logical. Like you see, okay, I do a change. How much time does it take it to really see it? And like you see a difference between seconds to tens of minutes. And that's like any manager, any engineer, any VP R&D would like, okay, this is a good change. Like you can say, oh, we need to run metrics, we need to collect analytics. We don't need data. It's like logic, right? It's like you have a car and you have a hose. One is faster. Like you
Yeah.
can't really have like some kind of elaborate discussion. No, we need to collect metrics. We need to do like, no, it's just like, this is very easy to understand. Yeah.
I think you made very good points. I want to get back to something that Ivan said regarding the time that developers spend about a dev environment, for example. And I actually I've been long years in many forms of development. From developer, I was team leader for a year, and then I've been a tech lead and principal engineer. And when you are a developer, you most of the time do not face yourself with focus and context switching questions. Not because you are perfect, because you can always aim for your comfort zone, find the right team and company that will let you continue with your comfort zone in focusing. When I start experiencing challenges with focus and context switching was when I moved to DevRel. And then you need in one day to do community work, answer people question, and then develop some code, and then take this code and write a very fascinating content about it, and then you need to do a live stream, and in one day you have so many tasks, and
Welcome to
then
our lives. That's our lives every
yeah,
day. Yeah.
yeah. That's what I mean. This is where you understand that you can improve a lot of things if you're just invest in understanding your focus and understanding your context switch. And I totally agree with Aviram and with you that developers do not like anyone that will educate them, same as I was do, because every time that I feel something getting complex with my focus, I would find a different place in a team or and find a even a different company. Developers will do everything to stay in their comfort zone, especially when it related to focus. But my question, so when you talk about developer environment, I believe that technically a lot of this focus time or a lot of the time that is wasted is not because they are trying to find a solution for something, and not because they are wasting a lot of time to find why a bug happened. 20-30% of this time that is wasted, maybe even more, is because of the context switch. And Avram described it at the beginning. Something doesn't work, and then you remind that you need coffee. And when you get to go coffee, if you're at the office, you are find a colleague that also drink coffee, and then you spend another 15 minutes, and then you get back, you just try to run the CLI, and it's not working, so you go again to get water now, etc., etc. So do you think we can build tools that will also help with manage the context switch when you are building? Let me rephrase the question. When you are building your experience with Daytona, do you have this user experience in mind? I want also to save this context switch time when I'm improving developer productivity.
Yeah, to a point, yeah. Absolutely. So how we argue, so it's not exactly, because I think you're talking about a wider sort of like
Yeah.
issue there. But what we do is, because you can spin up essentially infinite dev environments, like infinite laptops, I can context switch really easy. I don't have to kill anything I'm running. So if I'm working on my project, whatever it may be, And so, Gabriel, you need help. Like, I can spin up a dev environment without stopping mine, like do whatever I want to do with help you and just kill that and then go back to my thing. So it's not exactly what you're talking about for
Yeah.
sure, but it is to an extent where I don't have to like shut something down, off, turn something on, shut that down, go back to the other. Oh, it didn't turn on because of whatever, or something is taking time. And now, again, going to get coffee because it's just loading and I don't care. And so I can have all these multiple things running at the same time because I have infinite, essentially, compute resources. Well, if your admin gives it to you anyway,
Yeah.
there should be like restrictions on that. So partially, yes. Another thing on that, I think it's not specifically to your question, but it sort of leans into it. Whereas when we're trying to solve problems as products, you're essentially trying to solve a problem for a buyer for the most part. So we have an open source project as well, which is for the individual dev, and hopefully they'll find it useful and use it. But it's open source for a reason. There's never going to be anyone, like, you're never ever going to have to pay for that. Because developers, I feel for the most part, is like, again, cognitive load. I don't want to try it out. I might, whatever, depending on where you are as a developer. But the person that we're trying to solve the problem for is probably the owner, the manager, the founder, that whatever it may be. And they have a different set of incentives. And you're trying to make developers more productive for them without developers hating on you, or I'd say hopefully loving you at the same time. And then so who are you delivering value to? Who is the buyer of the product, and how are you doing that? Is something that I think a lot of dev tool companies actually don't think about. We made that mistake with Code Anywhere originally. So Daytona going forward was like, our buyer is like engineering manager or CISO. And so can we give them value? And at the same time, that developers hopefully love us when they're pushed to use us by the people on top. So I digress slightly, but I think it's all sort of relevant to the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I know Aviram also mentioned it in the beginning regarding the microservices, but when the like fighting mono and multi repo and stuff like that was a hype, many of the mono repo supported would talk about productivity. You know how long it takes you to manage multiple repositories, and that's also the same about monolith and microservices, and also the same about using a single language for across the whole stack, or using the languages that fit to that. What do you think about it, Avram? Do you think like really choosing all the way like a mono single is the right way to go from the developer? I know that you don't, so I'm looking for why we should go multi, go micro, and still keep developer productivity.
So it's not that you go for one or either. I'm not religious, so I think like it's what needs to be done. Like, if you are developing something that you only maintain, then go like levels. So just have your project committed. You don't even need CI/CD, right? And if you are a big organization, then I think the architecture of your organization should be the architecture of your application. So that means that unless you have like a horde of team that work in a monolith, you probably have teams, and those teams want to work independently without affecting each other. Well, they want to affect each other, but not in a negative way. So you probably have what you'd have as the organizational equivalent of service ownership. Like, you have like this team owns this part of our ecosystem. They have to do all it takes to make that thing work, and the others can rely on them to do that. And that's also how organizations are usually built. Like, you have different teams, and of course, like, you could have a monolith within an organization unit that talks to another monolith, and that's completely good. Like, not completely good. It really depends on on how many people are working on this monolith, and how many people and how many teams and organization units are under this solution. So I think that like, monolith isn't a bad word. Monorepo, multi-repo. It's just like, you need to see what your organization needs and what are you optimizing for. Are you optimizing for scale from day one? Then probably you need to think about like, how does it look like when I have 1,000 engineers? Or you're thinking, I'm a startup, I need to make it work today, because what matters is money and not how well I do my code, because that's not, as even a bit mentioned, it's like, it doesn't matter how good your product is if you can't sell it. So like, and then that's what you should focus on. You should focus always on bringing the value and bringing enough value to move the next step. And it's a long journey that you always need to keep your eyes on the goal, which is to sell more. So that's my take on it, which is very pragmatic. I don't have any hard feelings about it, and we don't use Kubernetes at Federal because we don't have a cloud pretty much. But like we
Yeah.
have a serverless Lambda that does something. That's basically our cloud. We might use Kubernetes just like our Kubernetes is usually for testing and like testing our product itself. But like so, I stand by my practice. So.
Yeah. And you say that no matter the practice you choose, make sure that is keeping the developer productive.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. It depends on like the use case and what you're doing. So, like for our open source product, like it is a mono repo on purpose. It just makes it easier. People can contribute it faster. Like it's just like an easier way to do. I mean, essentially, we try to do mono repos as much as we can, especially when you're a startup. So like the point is that basically you're not going to make a rocket to go to Saturn if you can't make it out of the atmosphere, right? So it's like you're going to, as a startup, you're going to build it on the way, and doing a monorepo makes it really fast and easy for everyone to start to collaborate on that. Obviously, our enterprise product now has 2 repositories in it, right? So there's reasons why we had to do that. It's like, oh, we really didn't want to. We wanted to keep it into one. But for other reasons, we decided that we have to do it. And that's, as you scale, there's things that you're going to have to do to build the best possible product you can do. So again, it's not super religious, pros and cons for both of them. And it's basically just, deciding the right tool for the right job. And again, on the enterprise, we have multiple, and on the open source, we just have one.
Yeah, I'll give another practical example. We had when we started, it was one repo, and then we had multi, and then we had one repo, and then we had multi, and it's just like depending on what we try to achieve at, let's say, the next few months. For example, Moody is a CLI tool, and it has plugins. And
Yep.
initially, the plugins were next to the CLI in the same repository, but we didn't want to create a relation like a dependency between the CLI and the plugins. We wanted people could update the CLI and could update the plugin interchangeably, and that made them very separated in terms of CI/CD as well. So like we could invest in like doing a monorepo architecture where you build and release only the part you're doing, but then you lose one of the values of the monorepo because like you're now spending time on like how do I create this GitHub action that just runs on this files change, and then I need to make sure that it's only affecting these things. And it was just easier to make it in another repo and just like have a separate GitHub action that just does what's relevant. And we haven't looked back yet. We might like the only thing we are looking at is like bringing the issues back to the main repo because it's nicer for the user to not think whether it's a plugin issue or CLI issue. But that's like, yeah.
Yeah. I think we are now 7 minutes to close, so that's a great chance to ask anyone who are watching us and want us to discuss about any point or anything to put your comments. And for the time we left, I would want to bring up, you are both open source founders. I know, Ivan, Daytona decided to open source a couple of months after you started, and I would be happy to hear more about it. And Aviram, you are first day open source. And in the last couple of months, open source is a hot topic, especially in terms of, I think it is actually interesting because the first like license change I remember, and I want to consider myself young, is the Elasticsearch one where like AWS started to fork it. And then we had the Terraform, like talk about the bigger ones, and then we have Redis. And the Redis feels like the last thing, because after that they became like Sentry got with the first source, and then Valky created a lot of noise. What do you think about it?
Who are you asking? Who wants it? One.
No, I ask Ivan because you
Sure.
decided to open after.
Yeah,
And
so I'm happy to explain that. So we started as a enterprise closed sourced on-prem infrastructure tool. Like that's how we started. Like we got inbound, we had MVP, created the product, that's it. We always thought about open source as a means of distribution, but also at some point, like if we're solving this big problem of dev environments, which we've all agreed is still a problem, like why can't the rest of the world have this solution as well? And so when we were thinking about it and we are building the product, like you build as fast as you can. So we're building the enterprise. And we're like, okay, in the back of our minds was always like, how do we open source this? But how do we open source in a way that we don't screw over the rest of the world in like 2 or 5 years? So that we don't do an elastic ELv2 or we do a hashi with Terraform, or people just hate us for that. And I was actually interesting when I met a bunch of founders at a open source event a couple months ago to talk to founders and ask, like, why did they choose the license, like MIT, Apache, AGPL, or like open core for some part, propriety for other, or whatever other, or just like the ELv2, which is basically just source available. It's not even open source, so to speak. And I found that from a very, altruistic, I can say naive point of view, like people didn't think about it too much. It's like I created a solution to a problem. I put it on the internet and I picked a like license that seemed okay. And I didn't think that much about it. And seeing how the world works, we're like, okay, we're not going to open source anything until we're sure that we can open source it and that we don't have to pull back the license. And so it took us about 9 months to figure out where the sort of carve out is. So for us at Daytona, the whole product is not open sourced, and it's not an open core, as people call it, where like a GitLab, where you have like a one repo with everything and some folders or some files have one license, some have the other. We found that that's like way too complex for the vast majority of people, and contributors want to do that. It's like we basically carved out one of the value layers of Daytona, essentially the core, and created that as its own repository. And then that's what we open sourced, and then that's upstreamed to the Daytona enterprise. And so what we achieved with that is, one, it's super simple for all developers. Like, it's a very small repository, very easy to read, very easy to contribute to. And so you have that. And also it's upstream to the enterprise. So the enterprise product has all that, availability in there. But the way we carved it out, and that was the most complex thing, is where is the value? Where is the user versus the buyer? And so the user for us is the developer. And so everything that the developer touches is open source. That's all open source. And everything the developer doesn't care about, audit log, security, authentication, scaling, whatever you think about, like none of that is part of that. And so that is how we thought about it. Like, time will tell if we're correct. But we did spend quite a long time trying to figure it out. And it's probably the inverse path of every other open source project that exists in the world. I don't know if anyone else did it that way, but that's sort of how we thought about it.
That's the way Permit works. So beside of the engine of policy synchronization that we are maintaining as open source, and many people is actually using that as their authorization service, our decision, like our strategic decision, is that everything that runs in the developer environment is open. So that, it's kind of the opposite of yours, but everything that runs in the developer environment is open. The decision engine that they made decision against stuff, the policy that they configure, everything is open. And I think it's a good model, but we left like really short time, and I really want to hear from you, Aviram, on your experience, your open source from day one.
And so it's also like me. I'm open source since day one, just like how I learned coding on an open source community since I was a kid. So I always loved contributing and participating in online communities. And when I started the company, I really wanted it to be open source, and I was a big fan of PostHog. I read the whole handbook, and I was like a very cheerleader mode when it comes to PostHog. And I nudged the I want to be like PostHog, and it did align with what we were doing, because when we went to the classic move by startups is to go and have design partners, then build for them, then sell to them, and then that's how you roll. And in our case, when we said what we want to do, we were like, yeah, it's not gonna work. and there's a lot of work that we needed to do to make this magic happen, because there was a lot of deep tech that we developed to do that. And when we started as an open source, people could be like, okay, I get what they're trying to do and what they're building. I might as well help them and give them my insights on how it can be better and even contribute to it. So that brought the first companies that became our customers and saying, yeah, we need this enterprise feature, and then we just added it. We did have a solid plan of what would be the paid product from the get-go. But like we really wanted to make sure that developers would use it, because if developers don't use it, we don't have anything to sell anyway. So
that's very interesting. So with that, we are wrapping up our hour. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Aviram and Ivan, for joining me today. That was very interesting discussion. I think we got a lot of insights from here. So thank you again. And if you want to have last words, that's your time.
Yeah, quickly. Thanks everyone for joining. If interested in Daytona, Daytona.io, and GitHub/Daytona.io. Thanks so much.
yeah, so thank you everybody. Thank you Ivan and Gabriel for the great evening. And yeah, Moody.dev. Welcome to join our Discord, ask questions, and reach out to me if you have anything. So, yep, thank you.
Thanks, bro.